So it is Friday and I want to have a little assessment of the week. But first things first, I use my eyeliner as lipstick. It doesn't have like full coverage, but I don't know. I think that is a way for me to have, even more fun because as I said, I like colors. So there's that. Also, this shirt is actually probably one of the oldest shirts I have. There's probably like four other shirts I've had longer than this one. That's still my wardrobe. It is, the Martian from Looney Tunes, and I got, I think it was 2017. It used to be a shirt that I wore a lot. I think I like the format. It is, an XL because I don't know. I think that I like these, t-shirts. This is for me to be kind of like large. I think that they're more comfortable. Although I will say that they're kind of hot. We're still in. Oh, I think today is the first day of fall here. So we're getting kind of like colder, but we're still like not there. And I am pretty much feeling pretty hot to be completely honest. But it is what it is. Like I'll get over it. But yeah. So something else before I talk about my week. I just learned a new word in English. It is octoroon and quarter room. And I learned that like I'm an octoroon because so basically back when they had like the rule of blood and all that, I guess I was being considered black at that point. Also, there's Sinners the movie, and there's like Haley Steinfeld's character, and she also is what I guess you call an octoroon. Also, I kind of like I saw this, and yeah, I saw that, and I think that it may be something used derogatorily, so there's that. I don't know. I saw this on a Key and Peele sketch, the one with Obama is kind of like greeting the white people a certain way, the black people a different way, and then there's an octoroon, and he said that. I was like, what's that? So I looked it up because my grandpa, my mom's dad, he is black, he's biracial. His mother was white, his father was black, and yeah, so that's pretty much where that 12.5% comes from. But yeah, so I learned a new word. It's pretty interesting because I feel like there are a lot of words that I don't remember necessarily like the meaning and all that, but still like I've seen them before. So it's kind of like interesting for me to be like, oh, I've never seen this word before in any context whatsoever. So like now I have, and there's kind of like historical, like significance to this. So I learned a little history. There's that. I also don't want to get in deeper because when you talk about race, racism, like that is very, that's the type of thing that I try to step up, and talk about whenever, this kind of like situation, approaches. But it is kind of like a very taxing, subject to discuss. And this is not what I want to be talking about because it's also like this is like me shouting into like the ether. Like it's not really, I don't know, because I think if I'm having like a real life conversation with somebody, I might kind of like try to actually talk about these and try to kind of like make like the other person kind of like get a different perspective. But like I don't think this is happening here, and it doesn't really have to happen here because this is kind of like my safe space, you could say. Like this is the place where I'm kind of like looking into myself and I'm trying to improve, I'm trying to kind of like grow, and all these issues, they are very much a part of life. So like I am very privileged in the sense that I can kind of turn it off in a certain way, but I do know that even people who are experience like those unfairnesses, like they still need like a little moment, a little break from reality, because as I said, like it's very it's taxing. It's something that it can be very overwhelming having to deal with that from the world around you. I had my own like situations, and I kind of like find the older I get, the more I'm kind of like trying to kind of like like look away from that, because there's some things that you're gonna face regardless. I'm thinking mostly of like gender, like religious affiliations, political affiliations, or sexual orientation, all that. So those are experiences that I have to have. So I'm trying to kind of like I don't want to have that be kind of like happening unnecessarily, so I'm kind of like taking a step back. But anyways, that being said, as I wanted to kind of like have a little assessment of my week, and honestly things worked out pretty great. For example, before like this video I was writing, so today I was able to work and to get things done, like I was able to kind of like keep up the pace. Yesterday I had to stop kind of like early the video because I was feeling weak, but yeah, so I ended up like laying down a little bit and I got back together. I ended up not going to my swimming lessons. It wasn't necessarily because like I was feeling weak, but that was kind of like part of it. But now I'm back. I'm feeling great. Things are working out great. Also kind of crazy, I'm thinking about this shirt again because I don't think there's a single video in this channel that I'm wearing it. But if you kind of like look at my other channels, the ones that came before this one, you'll probably see a lot of this shirt because I really like it. I don't know why, like I'm so attached, but it is. I think it is comfortable. So there's that. I don't know. I like this pattern. You know, I think I like when you have patterns. They are kind of like unusual things. Unusual in the sense that like this is a character. I don't know. I think sometimes when you look at patterns, there's like flowers. You see a lot of hearts. I have like that shirt over there with shoes. The shirt, not shirt, my dress. So yeah, so that's kind of like that. But as I said, like today has been great. I have been able to kind of like get everything I needed to get done. I got it done, so I am, like, and then right now, I'll go early to college today because I want to go to the restaurant that we have there. That it is for students, and which it is 560. We call it bandejão. Bandejão is like the. It's like a tray, a big tray. That'll be the literal translation, and you can kind of like. I think pretty sure like you can eat like as much as you want, although like reasonably, but you can eat like a really good amount of food for very cheap, and it's usually like it is food that is being kind of like cleared by like a nutritionist and physical care, like all of that. So it's good healthy food that tastes well and is cheap, which is ideal. I've been wanting to kind of like eat there more. It's the first time I'm going to go and eat, but like the lines are kind of insane, and usually when I go from Monday to Thursday, I remember I have come from like doing something else, so I already can kind of like running late. So like I want to kind of like wash my glasses, so I ended up not really kind of like using that. But it is it's still something interesting that I want to keep in mind. That whenever I do have the opportunity, I want to go there. So that's going to be so that's going to be the end of my work week. And as I said, like I'm really happy because I was mostly, there were ups and downs, but for the most part I was able to get things done. I was able to write, I was able to kind of like manage my affairs, I was able to also like I was able to kind of like really manage my time well, because I ended up having to kind of like go out to get some stuff done, or run some errands, and I was able, despite that, still be able to kind of like get stuff done when I was in my room, kind of like working, studying and all of that. I was able to study. That is also something very monumental for me, because I can find, I see that I'm passionate about what I'm learning, about what I'm studying, and I haven't felt this passion since like 2019. So that was like this is huge for me. And the fact that like I'm not only interested, because there have been some classes that I've been taking throughout the years that I found it to be interesting, but like in a way that I wasn't really participating. It didn't help that I had like all these different episodes, like that was kind of like that got in the way. But basically what I'm trying to say is that I am passionate about this, which is something that is kind of crazy. And it does, my parents, they're looking at this from like a religious perspective. They're looking at it and they really feel like God is guiding my path. They really feel that is the case. They're allowed to think that. As I said, like I'm not really a believer, but I can see why they kind of like think that, because I ended up getting this. I didn't know this course existed before January, more towards the end of January, and I was initially going to get a different course, which by the way I don't think I would have liked as much as I like this one. So that's been pretty anyways, it feels good to kind of like something, because of course there's like many things that I like, that I enjoy, but like academically, like that was kind of like lost, because when I was younger I was very academically inclined, like I was very involved with all the academic things that I had to do. And basically where we are at right now, after that period of time, I kind of like lost that passion and that interest, and it's something that ended up impacting my whole life, because I think that passion kind of like carried out to like other areas of my life. So I was like a more curious, engaged person. I was constantly looking for things because I wanted to learn, I wanted to kind of like gain knowledge. So that is kind of I don't know, I feel like this is back. I'm back to this version of myself, and I'm really happy about it, because I know everything seems to be falling into place, basically. So because with my academic life, my career, my professional life, kind of like is following suit. I'm already, as I said, like looking at different things, different possibilities, work related, and like I have my situation right now. So if I can get basically like as much, if I can earn as much money, like I won't be choosing that. But I do think that, and also like it's my first semester. Usually they were saying that like people, they don't like to hire like these good internship positions, like they don't really go to first like the first period, first semester students, but like there's still like the future. So like I hope that I'll conclude this semester, I'll pass all my classes, and then I'll go to new classes next semester. And I don't know, man, it's just, this sounds so simple, so basic, but it's making, I don't know, I'm feeling like myself again. I'm kind of like figuring out who I am, who I was, and I'm falling back into like that pattern, and my life is like all the better for it. Like I'm kind of like, as I said, like I'm enjoying things, which once again, like I know this doesn't sound to be particularly monumental, but it is huge for me. I'm excited about school, and also, oh yeah, like before I go, I think I want to finish my assignment. Like I think I mentioned the one that my professor hadn't really kind of like given us the like open the thing to receive the documents yet, and she did that yesterday. So I'm going to finish that report, and I'm going to send it to her, and I think that is going to conclude certain, not conclude a cycle, it's more like the beginning of a new cycle in which I am like engaged, in which I'm like doing things, in which I am, because I feel like sometimes I look at myself and I wonder, like, am I doing as much as I possibly can? Like, am I being reasonable in this particular way? Like, am I, not reasonable, that's not the right word, but am I being kind of, I don't know, like, sensible? I think sensible is a good one. Am I being sensible? Am I kind of, am I expecting too much for myself? Am I expecting too little? Like, and as I said, like right now it feels like everything is working. I feel like I am making progress in areas that I haven't really experienced progress for the longest time. So that is good, and that is making me more excited to exist and to live and to enjoy life. So there's that. But anyway, so the LDR, basically I ended up being able to kind of like get through all the things I set up for me to do this week, when it has to do with work, with school, with my hobbies, my interests, my side gigs, and all that. And I have no reason to believe that like next week is going to be different. Oh yeah, tomorrow I'm going out. Like a friend of mine is going to have barbecue, and I already got some meat. Basically is the meat that my parents bought, but then they gave me a piece of it is some type of cow meat. I don't know exactly. Oh no, I think it is like that kind of like pork that the cows have here. Yeah, I don't know. Also, like I'm not really connoisseur of meat, so like I don't really remember how like they call these different parts of like the animal. Yeah, I don't know that in Portuguese, let alone in any other language. Oh yeah, also talking about languages, I'm really inclined to to go back to Italian. Like this is something that my parents have been kind of like asking me every so while, like am I going to, because now that I am a student at my university, because I've been through the language courses, the language classes from this university before, but I wasn't a student there at the time, and now I am, so I have 25% off. So I've been thinking that like maybe I could get it. It'll be around like $200 per month, but I wonder if I can kind of like spare that much, because for example, this month and last month I ended up not really going to my my therapy sessions, and so like I had a little money to spare because of that. Yeah, so I don't know. I still am not sure. I have until the 27th to kind of like enroll, and I think, because basically what happened is that I decided to watch a video from this guy, and he's Italian, he was speaking Italian, and I kind of got what he was saying, which, to be fair, like Portuguese and Italian, there is like a little, there's a connection there. They're both romantic languages, and there are some things they're kind of common. But I did also study back in 2018. I took one semester of Italian, and I think that is something that I think I learned something, basically is what I'm trying to say, since I was watching the video, and I was watching it once a regular speed, because like watching the language you don't speak and try to speak, like really baller move, but I wanted to understand what was being said, and actually I didn't understand everything, but I understood way more than I thought that I would have, which maybe is like that moment that I was talking about back in room, of like me kind of like certainly realizing like I know more than oh my god, things are happening, what the fuck. Just generally, like it feels like everything's working out so well for me. But yeah, but basically so now I'm kind of like excited, like it will have to be the basic, like not even the basic, the beginners class, because also like the basic class like it's been canceled because there's not like enough people, and also I kind of like thinking whether, because they have this kind of like crash courses, you could call them, in the January or February. I think they have one in January, they have another one in February, and they have it in July, where it's basically like you go there every day and spend hours there, so you kind of like cover as much as you would cover in one semester. So maybe like I could like do this, and then in the middle of the year like I would do like this, the basic one, because also like it lasts like 12 months, because for example if you have like the certification that you can like did the other course, but I did it in 2018, so it is not really it's not good anymore for this, and also as I said, like it's not like I did study at certain points in time, because also like I feel like the language that I would go to learn would be French, because I've been low-key studying French since I was like 15, but it was like me just studying for myself. I did take proper classes back in 2018 as well, and ended up taking 2 classes, and they were pretty good, although I will say that I wanted things to flow better in a certain way. I wanted to kind of like, naturally like we all had the temptation to want to learn something right away and get to the point you're proficient, but like now that I'm thinking about my life in the future, I can go back to kind of like thinking about languages, because this is something that for the longest time I was very I was like, what's the point? I'm gonna die next month, next year, so like I don't want to spend my money on doing this. I want rather, for example, buy food, buy snacks, and like go to restaurants and stuff that will kind of like bring me joy. But like right now that I'm thinking about things long term, because I want to be alive and I want to enjoy myself, this is a part of that. So there's that. I don't know how, because also like an issue I'm having is that they don't tell you like the time. I kind of like need to know like the time and the day of the week that it is going to be, because I have other stuff to do. Not only that I have other stuff to do, I have other assignments, I have other appointments, I have other stuff to get through, so I need to know. But I don't know, like I'm excited. I really want to get back to Italian, now that I'm like a citizen, like I should be speaking, and I've been a citizen since 2024, so it's going to be 2 years, around like April or June. I don't remember exactly when we got the citizenship, but I should be speaking the language. That's kind of like where I'm at, and that's kind of like what I want for myself. And also because it's the same thing with like, I think also like my loss of love for academia really impacted this as well, because as I said, when I was younger I loved learning, and it could be formal formal education, it could be structured learning, it could just be random things, like they all really appeal to me. At a certain point, like I kind of like lost that, so I think that I would be able to kind of like make a lot of I don't know. I want that. I don't really need to have a deeper explanation. It's just like I want to get back to learning languages, which has always been a passion of mine. It's something that I've like dedicated a lot of time to. Also, like they don't have Mandarin, and I think because also like Mandarin is from like a different course, so I could look into it, because I did like 1 semester and a half. I did 1 semester in 2018, and then when I came back in 2019 or 2020, something like that. I took another one, but like that one was back. It was 2020, because I was back. It was during the pandemic, so the classes that were supposed to be in person ended up being online, and I really fumbled the bag on that one. There's also like this online learning thing. It was not working for me. Like I was kind of struggling with like making things work. So it kind of sucks that I paid money for that, but at least it was my money, because when you kind of like you're doing something on your parents' time, like if it was like, oh, I'm wasting that, I think that is also something that motivates me, because of course I don't want to like waste my money, but like that's kind of like my decision. If you're wasting somebody else's money, like that is more fucked up in a way. But I'm at a point where I'm not really like my money, yeah, it's pretty tight, I would say. Naturally, like I'm making it work, but like there are still I'm still, for example, having the help of my parents with like some stuff, and I wanted to get to a point where I no longer need that. So that is something for me to kind of like try and focus my energy this year and next year, because maybe like I was talking about internships, like maybe I can make it work what I already have going on. Maybe, because usually like there are internships, like are there, I don't think they're 8-hour internships. They are like 4 and 6. Like I did a 4-year internship when I was in high school, and then when I was in college before this course or the other majors I tried to kind of like get through. I also had different internships that were all like 6 hours. So there is that. But yeah, I think I could make 4 hours of my day. I couldn't make it work. Basically, I'll have to be more responsible in a certain way, and I'll have to kind of like, I think that things will have to be flowing very well, because if I'm kind of like, I'm going to have like 4 hours I'm going to dedicate to this internship, it means that there's 4 hours that I won't have to do other things. I can still make it work, as I said. I can still kind of like fit things into my schedule, but like I would have to make sure that like every moment I have, I am kind of like learning, that I'm not learning, but I'm like getting things done. So for example, with my writing, if I'm gonna have only like I'll have like 4 less hours in a day to kind of like work and study and write. So like I have to make sure that the moment I am writing, that I'm truly doing that I'm making progress. Naturally, like inspiration is not as clear cut like that. Sometimes like you're going to have inspiration and you're going to be able to get through things, but sometimes you won't, and that is perfectly fine. Also, I realized that I was talking about that my black lipstick, when it's over, I can use like my pencil, like my eyeliner, to kind of like do this. Maybe it could be even like how I use like the little stamped one, but whatever. But back to what I want to say. So yeah, so that's kind of like where I am at. Today is going to be like the end of like my second week of class, and so far so good. As I said, I'm really enjoying what I'm learning. I'm really enjoying like the assignments that are being given to me. Like they feel like something that I can do, and we're still not in the phase of group projects yet, but like that is going to be an interesting challenge. That I don't know who's going to be in my group or what group I'm going to be a part of, but that is an opportunity for interacting. And honestly, like there's a lot of people, because this is something I was telling my mom that I noticed, because whenever you go to college, there's always like the kids, like people who just graduated high school, or graduated like an year earlier, and sometimes like they don't really know what they're doing with their lives. They don't really know why they're there for. They just go to college because like that's the thing you do after you graduate high school. So it's not that they're not committed, but they're still figuring things out, right? While you have somebody who's like in their 30s, 40s, 50s, like they are there for a reason, like they are there. It's not that the other people aren't, but like they are there because they specifically wanted their course. Usually, like there's a specific application for what they're going to learn. It can be work or whatever. So I would rather be a part of like the group of those people, also because they are usually the ones that they already have like kind of like their schedules already like more compromised than the other younger ones. So we can. So I guess like what I'm trying to say is that for example, they will understand that I can't like be available at all times. Not saying that like the kids, like they aren't, like there's many of them probably already working and all that, but I don't know. I think that I am getting to a point where I'm kind of like one of the old ones. There's like older people in my class that there's like because also like I think that in the US, for example, like classes, just because for example high school is a good example, that you have different classes with different people, where here is very much not like that. Like your class, it is specific, it's the same group of people. Instead of like you have a teacher that has a classroom, and then you go to that classroom, you have the class that like that classes, and then the teachers go there. It's the same thing with college. So for example, the people I'm studying with, like they, for the exception, like there one or two people who are kind of like further down the course, and they're kind of like retaking some class, like they are all there's like the people I see every day. So like that is I don't know, this isn't really mean anything, it's just like an observation I had, and I kind of like realized that I'm accepting that I'm like one of the old ones now. I'm 28, so there's a lot of like 18, 19-year-olds. There's older people than me, like there's people in their late 30s, in their 40s, and like I said, like that. I'm accepting them old because I kind of like wanna have class with them, because also like they have more knowledge and more experience, and some of like those older folks, like they have I said that they kind of like have some type of lived situation where they kind of like have, I think it's not that they're giving me more, it's not that they have more to give, but I feel like there's more that I can learn from them. Not to say that I can learn from the kids. But it is a good sign that I'm accepting that I'm old, because this was such a huge deal for me for so long, and not only isn't not just like this. I think I've been observing like small things. For example, like I see a meme that I don't understand. I no longer feel like, oh my god, I don't understand this anymore. I'm no longer the target demographic here, because I am Gen Z, but I'm like old Gen Z. If goes from like 97 to 2012. So for example, my brother, who's a decade younger than me, he's also Gen Z, but like he's living a different time of his life. I'll also prepare, like sometimes I look back and I'm like, am I, because I don't know, because I was very just, I isolated myself from society for so long that in some ways you could argue that how do I put this, I know I didn't really live some things to the fullest. I mean, I didn't have those experiences, and that is something that thankfully I don't regret that. But it does make me think, how would it been like for me to be socially engaged with people when I was 18? Like what more would I have learned? Because also because like I'm living online and I'm like curating a certain experience. There's a lot of like memes and stuff, for example, for my country that I'm not really aware of, because I'm online and I'm just looking at stuff from like a worldwide perspective. Although to be fair, like I say that, but it is kind of like this Anglosphere, because it is kind of like the language that we speak to kind of like understand each other. So like those are the things that I'm kind of like consuming, and I didn't really get to a point where I was I don't know, basically I'm trying to say I didn't really have friends, and that was a choice that I made, consciously. Like I was pushing people away, and I felt that I was too good, to have friends. Like I was above that. I was way past that. But like right now that I am, I have friends and I'm interacting with people. As I said, like I'm going out, there's going to be a barbecue tomorrow that I will be a part of, so that is pretty fun. So it's so I'm not looking back with regret, but I am, wondering like, would I have, like what would that have been like, basically. But yeah, so kind of like over that section, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about some of my, like my little eureka moments, my realizations, my, like everything that I kind of like learned about myself. And I want to start with some things that I was thinking of yesterday when I went to bed. I mean, when I went to bed yesterday, like I think I slept fairly quickly compared to other points, like this week, but I still had like time to kind of like do it's not really affirmations, but it's just like me stating the obvious, not obvious, but like stating things that I haven't really been able to state before, that I felt embarrassed about, that I felt guilty, that I felt like I was incompetent or something, kind of like just not just like my shortcomings, because some of this they're not really inherently negative or positive, they're kind of this neutral, but because of the way my mind was working at the time, because of my tendencies, like I saw those as being very negative, and that kind of got in the way of like me fully enjoying myself, fully embracing who I was, and that kind of got in the way of like me achieving things, because I would spend so much time, I was invested for so long in my fantasies. I know that it's probably tiring to hear me talking about fantasies again, but it's just because that they kind of like affect me. That's how much they pester me. So like what I'm saying, it doesn't even like encompass that. Like I'm kind of stuck in a certain way, because I make progress, but I don't really seem to kind of like completely overcome like those fantasies. Also, but I will say that this past few days, like they've been pretty good in terms of fantasies. I've been more focused on the things that are happening in my life, so I was able to like I'm more focused on the things happening in my life, so I'm not really leaving room for like those fantasies to kind of like pester me so much. Basically, I have been kind of like recontextualizing some things. So for example, when I was 16, I felt very incapable of like doing things. I felt very incompetent. I felt that I wasn't smart enough, or smart at all sometimes, and I felt that like there was this block, this thing that was getting in the way of me kind of like doing something, in the way of me getting things done. So yeah, that is kind of like how I felt. But at the same time, I was kind of suppressing those thoughts, and I was focusing on my fantasies. They were kind of like what was satiating me in a certain way. Like this, they were pretty much what I had. That kind of like made things alright. They're pretty much the things that got in the way of like me just driving myself insane. Although I could argue that I was driving myself insane. So they were in the way of that, and they were also lost my train of thought. So they were kind of like my solace, but at the same time, like as I talked about before, like they were smoke and mirrors, so there was no so like they were not enough to kind of like get me attached to reality, because like at any point in time, because I didn't have anything truly grounding me other than like these thoughts in my head. So if I get to a point where I no longer care about that, I'm kind of stuck in this place, kind of like I'm stuck in quicksand, because the more I move, the deeper I kind of like get, because yeah, I don't know. But that's pretty much that. So like 16, I mean, I will say that this is more, this is closer to the second half of the year, because the first half I still had hope that things would turn out a certain way, and I didn't really let myself think about the worst case scenario, which in that case would be like me not being approved in some of the colleges, or not have the money, which is pretty much what happened. My parents did not have the resources to send me away. When I say send away, it seems like they are pushing me away. Like, not really. They were supportive, and I feel like my dad more specifically would have wanted me to stay, but like they believed in me, and they believed in the future and in the projects I had. So yeah, bless my parents, like they are great. But as I said, like the first half, I was kind of like, I don't know, things were not really working. It's kind of interesting because I look back and I think about the things that interest me now, and because they have to do with things that were already happening back then, but my interests were so different. And I think that is kind of like how fantasies, they mold you, because you end up experiencing things in your head that didn't really happen, but you experience them. So at least like I do, and it probably has to do with me being bipolar, my ADHD, my trauma, all that together. It kind of like it leads to this thing in which, as I said, like I'm experiencing the sadness, the joy, like the conflict, like the victories that I had there, like I'm feeling those things, but it's not real. It's not real. And also, like, it is not enough. I will say that the sadness is a crazy one, because I do feel like I have experienced it in more than one way, regarding things that I have like lived. But the joy, I feel like the joy, I think also like sadness, I've experienced like the depths of sadness. So I think that whenever there's a situation in my fantasies that I feel sad, my brain really does a good job at recreating like the pain from depression, all that, while like the positive things, they're never enough, because they're not real. So like they in a certain way justify your existence, they justify what you're doing, but because they're not real, they don't really, there's nothing for you to show the world, like regarding that. And it's not that everything has to happen outside your head. There's a lot of like growth that happens internally, but externally we still have to consider it, because externally that is kind of like, sometimes you just need something physical to kind of like hold on to, basically. So I think that like my books, my novels, like they mean so much to me, because if I'm feeling down or something, I can go to them, I can touch them, I can flip through the pages, and it's there. And it's kind of like a testament to my time and my effort, and that kind of like it being there, it has an interesting impact on my mood, for example. So for example, if I'm fantasizing about, I know, being a filmmaker, an actress, a writing person, director, whatever, and there's like an award that I can hold on to, like I can look at that and be like, here, like this is pretty much what I have from my time and effort that I know I spent on doing this. While I mean, of course, the satisfaction of like concluding a good project or whatever, just doing something that I've been dreaming of doing since we were kids, like that is also important. But I think that my mind is kind of soured by the fact that I lived so much, so I lived for so long on my finances, and I still do it sometimes to this day, because like those immaterial things, like they have had an impact on the way that I look at the world, the way that I look at myself. So that's pretty much what I think about the example of my book. When I go through, the PDF version of it, like it is pretty much the same thing, but I don't know. I feel like it doesn't have. It's not that it doesn't have the same value, but like if I were to have like when I finish my third one, like if I only have it online, I don't know, like it's going to have. This is just me. I'm not trying to say that this is like the human condition or anything, but what I observe is that I think because of my delusions, like I really need concrete things that I can touch for me to feel something about like my work and myself. Because also, like if you think about work and just things that you do generally to make money, you have the money to speak for that. So like it is something concrete. Like if I were to do something like in a voluntary capacity, I would still be helping people, that way, but I might be helping them even more. But it wouldn't, I don't know, like, because I would kind of like add that to my resume, as in like the extracurricular activities. It's interesting because like I'm still thinking in terms of like your application, like the whole process for when you go to college. I think some parts of my brain are really still kind of like wired that way. They're wired to have me kind of like think about what would get me to college, even though I'm already in college and I already seem to have found something that I like. And also like I do have questions about this, because some of those like, who came first, the egg or the chicken? Like am I excited about this because my head is finally stable, or is this a course that I'm kind of like that is sparking something new in my life? Because I think both things are right. I think that the course in itself has really been enthralling me, being kind of like getting me involved. But I also think that the fact that I'm stable, like it helps me kind of like actually get things done. Because I feel like I would have still gone to class and watched everything, but I would not, for example, be kind of like doing the assignments or trying to kind of like work on the project, because my mindset is already different. I can already see the difference in the way that I'm approaching it this time. And that is what I need, that is all I need for my academic life. I need this willingness to kind of like not only to pay attention and to learn, but to do the things. Because as I mentioned before, there were some classes that I took throughout the years when I was enrolled in my other the other colleges that I was enrolled in and that was a bit of a redundant sentence, but whatever. But in those classes, like there was a lot of like me paying attention and learning and really enjoying what I was being taught, but I wasn't really engaged in doing like the projects and assignments that I had to do. And so I think that that's kind of like the difference right now. I think that I finally at a point where I'm like mentally stable, so there's no depression, there's no mania getting in the way of like me getting things done. So yeah, like life is good in that way. And I feel like life is only going to get better, because I'm really excited for for more assignments to start coming and for me to start doing these projects, because then I'll really prove to myself that like I am doing this thing, which is why I think that going back to the thing of like needing something physical to touch, I think that's why I wanted to kind of like print the assignment that I had, because it was very long, and it was kind of like a testament of like me getting my shit back together regarding my academic life. So I'm really excited about that. So I'm excited to kind of like get through the first semester, because like I'm going to basically prove to myself that like I can do this. And also like it will be like one is the first semester out of 8, so it's going to be like 1/8 of my course completed. 4 years is a long time in certain ways, or you could argue that it is not that long, but it is one of those things that I kind of like, a part of me wonders whether I'll get discouraged, because I really don't want to get discouraged. I want to continue working at this pace with me kind of like being excited about what I'm doing and what I can do and all that. But life is good, as I said. I'm at this point where everything is working out, which I know I've said a lot, but it's just that I don't know, I think that the principle is also the same, of like me wanting something concrete and me having to speak something aloud to kind of like validate it. Not validate it, but to kind of like, it's like I'm bringing that thing to life when I say it aloud. And that is kind of, I don't know, as I said, like there are feelings that I have that, I have to say them aloud before I can move on. So as I said, 2016, 2017, 2018, they were like, I think, no, 2018, like, things got better, but 2016 and 2017, like, I really had an interesting time. That made it seem like it was fun. It was not fun. But there were so many feelings of failure, and I had not learned to deal with that. That is kind of like one of the lessons I had there. Which, to be fair, like, is nothing wrong. It's it's very obvious, when I look back, that I didn't really know how to deal with failure, and I think that I was probably doing. I think at the end of high school, I was definitely dealing with failure better than I did before it, but it was one of those things that I just really. It's almost like I couldn't control it. I mean, it's my head, so like in theory, I could control it, but like I was just so entrenched. My head was so entrenched in certain ways. Had certain tendencies, certain behaviors that like I really struggled to break free. So so as I said, like I couldn't look at things and feel. I know when I look at things, I really it was very overwhelming. It's like things were too attached together. So like whenever if I had the feeling that like, oh, I'm not good enough, I can't get this done, I can't do anything, and which once again, like, not entirely true. I think the way that I look back at things was very not exaggerated, but I think I really amplified certain aspects of things, and I really downplayed some other, the more positive ones. So the feelings, they were mostly negative, and I was in denial about that, so that didn't help. But it was like everything that happened, like it was kind of almost as if like it was attacking me at my core. So the fact that I failed at doing something, in my head, it became this huge thing which challenged my identity. Because that was, I think that it goes a lot hand in hand with like my academic life, because at the time, like, that was something very important. And like right now I'm back to my academic life being important part of my life, but it's just that yeah, like, it's definitely important, but it's not the most important thing, because that is kind of like how I really, because I think it also has to do with control because of my trauma. So like I felt that if I wasn't something, I wasn't able to achieve certain things, and I'm talking about specific things, but just kind of like achieve a certain threshold of competence and capacity and ability. Like I everything was started to crash down, to crumble down. Like I would look at myself and I would see only the negatives, as I said, and I would see a threat to my identity, because I was supposed to be smart. So if actually, like, being smart will only get you so far. That's pretty much something I've learned with life, because I used to think that like that if I was smart, like I would get everything I ever wanted, everything I ever dreamed of, and that's just there are a lot of things that your smarts can surpass. And that is the lesson that it took me a long time to kind of like absorb, to internalize, because I was very much like, okay, so if I had this, if I had that, like I would be able to kind of like make this happen, and that's just not how things work. Yeah, so I think that is kind of like, I guess, a groundbreaking thing that I'm acknowledging to myself, that being smart is not like everything you need, and also that there are different types of smart, because I was very like thinking about intellectually, like the academic knowledge in a certain way, because I really thought that if I had that, I would be able to get to a place where I would acquire more knowledge and I would do more. And in a certain way, like, that is definitely a path that could be taken and that it could have worked, but it has so many underlying issues that I would have honestly I'm very honest right now. Like, I think that if I had, been able to study abroad as I wanted, when I turned, turned 18 and graduated high school, I would probably, I would have tried to kill myself. That is a given. But also, I had probably succeeded, because every time in my life where like that didn't happen, is because there was, like somebody, some circumstance, something that kind of like got in the way, and I would be alone there. So there would be like no one. So yeah, so that is kind of like, it's kind of, it's a little dark, but it is true, because that's what ended up happening, when I went to Portugal. I initially wanted to go to the US, to study there, and then ended up going to Portugal a few years later, and that's kind of like what happened. But there I had, support, so like I was, I'm still here. But yeah, so basically, that's pretty much one of the reasons why I think my parents are so hesitant to let me kind of like, for example, live on my own. And to be fair, like today, if I were to live alone today, like I think I'll be fine. But there's definitely, the possibility that something would happen, that my brain would change, I'll shift, and I'll get depressed and I will do something. I think that I am more resilient right now, so it takes a little bit longer for that to be the case. But still, it's kind of like, it's not that it is bound to happen, but there's a very high likelihood that it might happen. I'm talking about, I'm thinking mostly of the past in this context, because it has happened before, but also it could happen again. Is what I'm trying to say. I don't think, like, right now with everything working out so well, and like me being stable and all that, like it does feel a little far-fetched. But I don't know the future. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if, like, there's more negative things that are going to kind of like take place and occupy my brain. I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm playing safe basically. And the thing I've learned is that, like, you can play safe and you can still get things done, and you can still kind of like enjoy yourself. Because I think that was a fear that I had, that if I got, like, at a point, a stable point, things would be kind of like boring in a certain way. Not boring, but like that for me to be stable, I needed to kind of like sacrifice some things, like the moments I have with myself. But like that's not true at all. Like I'm kind of like very much an example of this right now. Like I am living my best life, as I've said many times before, and I can still do things that I enjoy. There's still like little, maybe not risky, but some risky things they're happening, all within a controlled environment where I am stable. But once again, like things that I stand corrected. I think that this is also it could be a new segment for me. Like I stand corrected. Let me look at the things. Oh, it's Friday. I think my dad has already arrived. So I stand corrected. Like I am very much. And I'm glad I'm stand corrected and happy, because I've been proven wrong, and sometimes being proven wrong is great. I think when I was younger, like that's one of my biggest fears, to be proven wrong, because I wanted to know everything and I wanted to be everything. So like I really needed a certain level of competence. But what I'm kind of like noticing is that right now, like these days, whenever like sometimes being proved wrong, it really just means that like your life is going to be easier, or things are going to be more manageable, more doable. So there's that. But yeah, so I've been having these moments with myself where I'm looking and I'm like, so that is gratitude, being grateful for things, like that is important, and it has really changed my outlook on life. But also kind of like allowing yourself to be wrong, allowing yourself to be proven wrong by life. And as I said, like this is something that it sounds bad, it sounds like something you don't want, but like in practice it's pretty great, particularly when like it improves your quality of life. So that's pretty much where I am at right now. I am just waiting for like the worst should not pass, because I'm waiting for the worst not to come to pass, which is a new reality for me. Because of course I don't want the worst to happen, but like my head was very much stuck in the idea that like that is bound to happen, like it is going to happen. And right now I'm like, maybe not, maybe the worst, maybe we can manage the worst, maybe I can have a full life, maybe I can really enjoy life to the fullest, like without all the negativity, and there are different types of negativity. And I think I talked about this before. Negative things are going to happen regardless of what you want. So don't bring more negativity than is necessary. I'm not really kind of like advocating for like radical optimism, because you have to be realistic, but like being realistic involves like you also acknowledging the positive things and like the good changes in your life, not just the bad changes. But yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap this up right now. So bye.